Welcome to Running Out of Space, a podcast about collectors, their collections, and how they make room for it all in their lives. Today's guest is Matthew Allison, the hand and mind behind the indie comic book Cankor. Though he's a recovering VHS tape collector, Matthew can't shake his habit of collecting comics and Grindhouse movie posters. If I had walked into the comic shop that Matthew worked at in the 90s, he would have probably turned his nose up at my choices. Today, we meet eye to eye as ragged junkies who can't kick. Check it out. Am I going to be looking at the alien face the whole interview?
I hope not. I'd like to get this video going. Okay, how's that?
Much better. Is that someone from Star Wars?
It's a Don Post mask who did all the Star Wars masks, that you could buy in Famous Monsters back in the day.
Yeah.
But it's called like a Gordian alien or something like that. It was a mask that my uncle had when I was a kid.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Did he scare the crap out of you, or did he change your life?
Oh, changed my life. Yeah, for the better.
I have moments like that. When I was a little boy, there was a neighbor, and I walk into his room, and plastered all over his room are like posters of like Def Leppard, Van Halen, Iron Maiden. It was the first time I saw the Eddie character.
Yeah.
And the Ozzy Osbourne Bark at the Moon poster.
Uh-huh.
Where Ozzy's like a werewolf.
Yeah.
Completely shifted my trajectory of my entire life. From then on, I was a metalhead, and I was a little boy, but like I could really point back to that moment of seeing that imagery, and it's something sparking in my little head.
Yeah, that'll do it to you. I mean, it's those little things that for whatever reason, just a button gets pushed, and that's it. You're done. You're into that for the rest of your life. Yeah.
Were you always drawing, or was there something like that kicked you off and sparked your interest?
My dad would draw a lot. He actually did tattoos for a little while when I was a kid, and my mom was an artist, or still is an artist. So just seeing the two of them work on stuff, and they always had art books around the house. My dad was really big into Frank Frazetta. So, my dad had the Frazetta books and calendars, and then my mom would recreate Frazetta paintings with pastels. So seeing her do that made me realize, like, oh, an actual person did that. You can sit down and get these tools and make something.
Yeah. That's really important to see somebody else doing it. It took a while for me to wrap my personal head around creating. When you're small and you're just kind of developing on your own, you just see finished product, and it seems like such a far distance away, such a far gap. But when you're little, seeing how something, the ins and outs, something how it started, progresses along, and then finishes, is probably so important to a creative.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And there was a program on PBS. It went under different titles. I know at one point it was called Reddit, Readit. I can't remember the other titles, but it was this artist who would read passages from famous books like Secret Garden and stuff like that, and then you'd watch him draw a scene from the book. So that was really fascinating to me as a kid too, to be able to watch somebody else do that and realize, like, oh, there's a thought process behind this. In some ways it became daunting too, because this guy was so just free flowing in the way that he created these images. There wasn't a lot of preliminary stuff, and he could have been doing all of that ahead of time, and then when he sat down to draw, he had drawn it already, so he was prepped in that way.
Yeah.
But so that for me, there was a little magic to it as well, because you could watch somebody do a magic trick that doesn't necessarily mean you can figure it out.
Sure.
So there, it was a balance between the two, for sure.
Yeah, things seem so unattainable when you're a kid.
Yeah.
Seeing finished product or seeing something that's done. But being in a household where you see the process, really must have advanced you in certain ways and kind of pushed you along into your own sense of confidence of, yes, I can do this too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. That's definitely the case.
So you're a collector, and I want to get to that, but you're also a creator.
Yes, indeed. Uh, yeah, I've been working in comics semi-professionally for the past 8 years. This last year, 2020, was the first year I just did art full time.
Hmm.
And so I had a book come out from Ad House in 2020, and prior to that, I was doing some self-publishing. Just had a new book come back from the printers on Friday, which went up for sale on my website, and I've almost sold out. So uh, it's
Congratulations to that.
yeah, it's been surprising with everything that's going on in the world that this was the year that I was able to make it happen because
Hmm.
once COVID hit at the beginning of 2020, I was like, oh man, I don't know what I'm going to do. Nobody's going to want to buy art. Nobody's going to want to buy comics. And it's been the complete opposite.
Yes.
Collectors markets have gone crazy. I know you've talked about it on the show, and other people talk about, it's just everybody's sitting at home and all they can do is get online and order all this stuff that,
Yes.
so yeah, it's been fortuitous in that sense.
Did you start, was your discipline in cartooning from the jump, or are you an illustrator or graphic designer? How did you angle towards sequential storytelling?
I think that was always ingrained in me, just because my dad always had comic books, and so in terms of how much art I saw, the majority of it was comic book art or
Mhm.
fantasy illustration or something along those lines, pulpy stuff.
Mhm.
So I think no matter what, I was always going to head in that direction. And once I got into high school, I got a job at a comic book store when I was 16. Was huge into Batman. It was 1989, so the movie had come out. We had just seen Dark Knight Returns and Batman Year One and Killing Joke and all this stuff. So Batman was my life when I was
A great
16.
job. 16
Yeah,
comic shop. Wow. That's a
yeah,
cool job.
exactly. Yeah, it was great. Except half of my paycheck, or more than half of my paycheck, went to buying comic books, which a lot of I got rid of over the years. But I'd had the collecting bug prior to that, but being there at the comic book store and being able to see collections come in, having access to all these back issues, and just you the daily exposure to that stuff really just locked me into the collector mindset.
Yeah. And you're in Chicago?
Yes, yeah,
That must be a big comic book city.
it definitely is. We moved here from Denver about 2 years ago, and
Okay.
compared to Denver, it absolutely is for sure. There's a lot of artists here.
Are there any artists that are famous that are from Colorado or from Denver?
The biggest one would be John Porcelino, who's
Uh-huh.
not originally from Denver. He's from Illinois, but he moved to Denver in the 90s, and he started King Cat Comics, which is a independent book that he's still doing to this day.
Mhm.
And it's been collected by Drawn and Quarterly, and he's pretty well regarded. And I would say him and Noah Van Sciver, who does a lot of work with Fantagraphics, the two of them are probably the biggest names from Denver, in terms of like alternative comics. There are some mainstream comic artists there. Amy Reeder, I think, is from Colorado, and a few others. So yeah, it's not definitely not as large of a scope as it is here in Chicago.
Yeah. Do you find your work is different compared from what you were doing in Denver to what you're doing in Chicago? Is the inspiration level a bit different?
That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that, but I think simply knowing that this is now my day job has changed the 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 perception of what I'm doing, in terms of this isn't just for fun anymore. It's not just a hobby. This is something, if I'm doing a custom commission for somebody, the mindset is I need to put in as many hours into this as I can to make it look, up to snuff in terms of the quality that they're expecting.
Mhm.
I'm also in competition with other artists because I'm repped by someone who has 30 other artists in his stable. So I'm, gauging what I'm doing compared to those other artists. Also, now being in Chicago and being around people that are more mainstream and have a higher profile, I feel like I'm now in that pool and being judged, compared to some of those other people as well. So it's definitely changed the perception I have of myself as an artist, for sure, and how that's seen in the artwork. I've tried new techniques in the last few years, which maybe have elevated what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
So that possibly has changed my artwork a little bit.
I find it, and I could be way off here. It's like I'm really into your style. It's kind of European almost, but it has a very American aspect to it. Can you talk about kind of where you picked up your style from?
I think that the style has come about because I could never really settle on doing a mainstream John Romita Jr. or Mike Zeck style comic look. There's a certain way that the artists that I like from the 80s period of Marvel, they're not necessarily house style, because I was more into the iconoclastic artists like Art Adams,
Mm-hmm.
Brian Boland, Dave Gibbons, Bill Sienkiewicz. Just the crazier the better, or the more stylized the better.
Yeah.
But people like Mike Zeck and Steve Rude were more rooted in traditional cartooning or comic book art. So there's a combination of that. There is a deep love for Mobius. Kaza is another one. A lot of the heavy metal guys, that you were seeing in the 70s and 80s. And then towards the end of the 80s into the early 90s, I just became super enamored with Daniel Klaus and Jim Woodring, the Hernandez brothers.
Yeah.
So I think my style is just a melding of all of that stuff. So you got like a little bit of Bernie Wrightson, but then you've also got Jim Woodring, and all those techniques have come together, and I'm not worried about who I'm appealing to. I'm not trying to appeal to the mainstream crowd. I'm not trying to wholly appeal to alternative comics people, and it just really freed me up to just do whatever I want.
Yeah. So. I know it's hard to talk about your personal style, so thanks for bearing with me on that one. Well done.
Sure. Oh,
70s is definitely a good kind of flag to plant when I'm thinking of your style. It's definitely that heavy metal 70s flair. Maybe that's what I kind of was picking up on when I said like that distinctively American feel as well.
Sure. Yeah. When I started this comic, Cankor, the intent was to draw something that was very similar to actually the comic I was aping a little bit was Avengers Annual #9. Which I think came out in like 1980 or 81, and it's Don Newton, who's about as traditional as you can get. I just thought, well, I'm going to do this weird superhero thing that's somewhat a tribute to that, because in that story, it's just the Avengers are stuck in their mansion, and there's this giant hulking creature named Arsenal who breaks into the mansion. So like, I'll just do that. And have some weird villain break in, but they're having a party and they're all getting really drunk. So they're so drunk that they can't deal with this this villain. So yeah, that was the style I was going for sure, was the Bronze Age, late 70s, early 80s stuff.
Very cool. And how many issues of Cankor have you put out? You said you put out a book on Ad House. I know you just released something last week. So how many total are in the canon so far?
Let's see. I did a mini comic initially, which is the one I was just talking about. Mm-hmm. And then I did a 2-issue series, and then the 4-issue series that was comprised in that Ad House book. So that's 7 issues, and then this new one would make 8. So about, not a whole lot of work overall in terms of that, maybe, 200 pages worth of comics so far.
And you ink them all yourself, right?
I do everything. Yeah. Yep.
That's fantastic.
Thanks.
So do you have people that clamor for the sold out books? Do you have people hounding you for original art?
I get inquiries into whether or not I have some of the out of print stuff, because I've been seeing that go for big money on eBay. Mm-hmm. The Ad House book Chris printed 1,500 of those. It was being somewhat conservative, and it sold out super quick. Again, very surprising during the pandemic. It pushed back the release date a little bit, but the book came out in mid-June, and by mid-August, we had sold 90% of the print run. And now that book goes for like $60 on eBay and up probably at this point. So I have this weird thing about letting these books die, because part of me, and every artist does this, everybody I know who does comics feels this way. Like at a certain point, you're like, man, that's not quite what I wanted it to be. My next one's going to be even better. I'm not worried about reprinting this. I'm not, if it's out of print, fine, because I'm going to do something better further down the road. But I do know that people want to read it. So eventually I'll probably collect everything I've done so far into a Kickstarter book, do like a hardcover edition. Just because, I'm not big on digital comics. I know that would be a good way for me to get the work out there, because there's no overhead, and I have had some people reach out and say that they would like to read something digitally. I just like having a physical book. That's just a personal preference for me. It goes back into the collector mindset for sure.
Yeah, I'm the same way. I actually do enjoy digital comics, but there are certain runs that I'll finish and I'll say to myself, oh, I wish I really had those hard copies.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that I can kind of tear through, maybe like old back issues, old events, stuff that is just impossible to kind of, honestly, to afford. Digital comics are good that way, especially, like Marvel's doing a really good job at it. And plus there's something to be said about like that dynamic view option.
Sure.
It makes it more cinematic. But yeah, there's often times when I finish something and I really now want either the issues, or I want the graphic novel on my shelf, or the absolute edition. So I'm with you. It's kind of a bummer when you finish something digitally and you kind of want to celebrate it a little bit more, but you don't really have anything.
Sure. Yeah. I had gone to some shops to get James Herron's new comic Ultra Mega when it came out, and I couldn't find it. So I was like, well, I'll go on Comixology and get it because I just want to read it. But the whole time I'm looking at it, I'm like, man, I really want this physical copy. And so the subsequent issues, I ended up getting physical. And eventually, I'm sure I'll just get that in trade, because his artwork is so fantastic. And I would love it to be oversized when they do finally print it. I don't know if that's feasible or not. But I'm, like in the moment, I am trying to fill in all the holes in my Frank Miller Daredevil collection, simply because I think those comics look so much better in the original printing. The plates are a little bit off. There's some funkiness in terms of, color trapping and things like that. But that's what I love about it. And I feel like Miller and Klaus Janson were working knowing that was how these books were going to look. And their color choices reflected that. So when you see those books in their original form on that cheap newsprint with slightly offset plates, it just looks fantastic to me, especially that content. That's those stories, when Daredevil drops down into the sewer and everything turns kind of a bluish green. I love all that. So I've shelled out a little bit of extra money to get some decent, quality copies of some of the earlier Frank Miller issues, just for that reason.
And you're not talking about the Mazzucchelli Born Again stuff. You're talking about the other stuff.
The earlier, yeah, like even the stuff that Roger McKenzie wrote when Frank Miller was just penciling it into the full Frank Miller run. Yeah. The Born Again stuff I've had for years. When I bought that stuff off the shelf when it came out.
Amazing. Were you working at the shop when that dropped? No, that was a little earlier.
It was a little before, yeah. That was, Mazzucchelli was my introduction to Daredevil, because I couldn't afford the Frank Miller stuff. So, right. There was a shop, the shop that I ended up working at prior to being in the location where I worked. He had a indoor flea market. And that was the first time I'd actually seen comic books bagged and boarded. Yeah. Or seen a full collection of something. Yes. Because all of my comics as a kid would just be random. My mom would go to the store and she'd just buy me whatever. So it could be Richie Rich one week, and then the next week it's Spider-Man.
Yes.
I didn't know anything about continuity. I saw the numbers on the cover, but I didn't know, like, oh, there's a whole story here. So when I went in and I saw, like, oh, wow, I could buy 15 issues of this Daredevil story and read the whole thing, that was pretty mind-blowing. I was probably 12 when I saw that for the first time.
Yeah, I remember that hallelujah moment when I first discovered a direct market shop. Walking in, seeing all the books there. It's not just a rack in the newsstand, but you really touched my soul when you said the first time that you realized that comics would be bagged and boarded. I'm right there with you. That was pure revelation.
Yeah.
I say this a lot, that a lot of people, they kind of they venerate the record shops as like changing their lives. For me, like, it was a comic book shop. Sure. I didn't really hang out in record shops.
Yeah.
It was more like sitting around in the comic shops.
Yeah, same here. My parents had a great record collection, but I don't, as a kid, we would get our records from Sears or Kmart. I didn't have that experience till after I'd graduated of making a trek to go to some out of the way record store.
Right.
But the comic book store, yeah. And when the guy that ran that shop was in the indoor flea market, my best friend and I, we were like, hey, we're going to go down there. I think his dad suggested this. Like, you should go and see if will let you work there for a weekend and then give you comics and trade for working there.
Yeah. And
what he had us do was bag and board comics.
Yes.
So you're sitting there looking at all of this stuff, and he didn't give us anything super valuable to, but it was like, I'm bagging a whole run of Alpha Flight. I'm bagging all of the, John Romita Jr. X-Men, stuff like that. And in the meantime, he's got on the wall some of the more expensive issues. So I was eyeballing those the whole time. And then at the end of the day, I was like, oh, I'm so excited. And he was like, yeah, I'll give you $15 in credit. You can get whatever you want. And I'm pretty sure I got Alpha Flight #1 because of that cover, and then some of the other Byrne Fantastic Four issues.
And comics were like $1 then. So $15, that was pretty good.
Yeah, it was actually. Yeah. This was maybe this stuff was
75 cents, maybe.
Yeah, 75 seems right.
Yeah. What was like seeping in when you were working at the comic shop? You mentioned Batman. Was it at the height? Was it like 89 Batman? Was it at that height?
Yeah, 89 Batman. So, right after that, you had Death in the Family, which was a huge deal, obviously. I got to see all of the Image stuff happen firsthand, and that just grossed me out.
Yeah.
Watching my boss, I have this blurb in my comic about this, where my boss, when Legends of the Dark Knight #1 came out, he was telling people, like, you need to buy hundreds of copies of this. And the mindset being like, imagine if you could go back in time and buy, the very first appearance of all these characters, and you'd be a millionaire right now. So that's what he was telling people. And I knew it wasn't true. It was like, this is impossible. There's no way anybody's going to be making any money off of this. And while that was happening, I was seeing books like 8 Ball come in. And I remember the first issue of 8 Ball being on the shelf. And I just look at that thing. I was like, God, this is so weird. It's this weird 50s style of art, but it's brand new. And it's got perverted stuff in it. And it's got this weird David Lynch thing going on. And that's intriguing to me. Love and Rockets was the same way. Yummy Fur scared me, Chester Brown's Yummy Fur, but I was fascinated by it. So I knew there was this whole other thing happening at the same time, that the speculator bubble was starting to blow up, and Image started, and I was seeing kids freak out about Rob Liefeld. I'm like, man, you don't, like, read Concrete, read, this other stuff. Dark Horse was putting out some cool stuff. Concrete was great. I loved that. That comic book, and it always was a shame to me that someone like Paul Chadwick wasn't making $1 million and being interviewed on TV. It's like, quality wise, it's just like, why is this happening? But it's just the nature of it.
Yeah, I was definitely a sucker for 90s comics. I was of that age. I love Todd McFarlane, but I stuck around long enough to kind of learn better. It's funny. I remember it was college when I discovered Daniel Clowes, and it was from getting insulted by this young lady who was a total Enid type, and I was talking comics with some other dude, and she asked if we've ever heard of Daniel Clowes, and I'm like, no, like what, who? And she thought we were total dorks, and that was kind of a turning point for me with comics, where I think the horizon kind of opened up, where it wasn't just spandex and capes anymore. I started kind of chasing after more of like the literature angle of it, the fine arts angle of it, I guess, or with a more kind of singular vision of it. Forget fine arts, just more singular vision.
That's the other thing too, was that you realize, like, well, this 8-Ball comic, this guy's doing all of this.
Yes.
There's no bullpen. It's not a group of people doing this. And then he started doing the Dan Pussy stories where he was making fun of that way of doing comics. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because I was like, wow, I could sit here and do everything on this. I don't have to team up with somebody. I don't have to find someone who can color this for me, or find somebody. And it took a long time for me to develop skills, because I dropped out of art school, and I had some other issues that kept me from, honestly, my collecting took over from my desire to make art for a very long time, and derailed that for most of my 20s, when I should have been just drawing every night instead of, you know, going to Tower Records and buying import CDs and shit like that. But yeah, that element of it, all of those creators that were being published by Drawn Quarterly and Kitchen Sink, and, you know, seeing Robert Crumb work early on. I mean, I remember seeing a lot of the, like, Zap comics. You'd be at some kid's house, and his older brother would have Zap comics, and I was just like, man, this stuff's kind of gross, you know. But you knew it was well done. You knew that the artists behind that had a lot of skill. And then Crumb, especially, you know, into the 80s, you know, Weirdo, the work that he did for Weirdo was mind blowing.
It's so aggro, his Weirdo.
Yeah.
Stuff. He's like, yeah,
absolutely.
And I'm remiss to say fine art. It really isn't that. It's more of the aspect of somebody following their own creative vision, because I mean, these guys weren't considered fine artists. This is only after the fact, so it's not really appropriate to kind of label it that. They were cartoonists, and they were traditionalists, I suppose, in a way, right?
Yeah, but
Clowes was like into Mad and stuff, right? And Cracked.
Exactly, and they took that and realized, you know, we could take this style of art. You could do a comic that looks like Ernie Bushmiller's Nancy, but you could make it about your own life. You can do something. You can do anything. You could make these comics about anything that you want to, and have complete control over it. And I know that a lot of people will say, you know, comics are great because there's no budget. You don't have to, you know, worry about your special effects budget. You can draw whatever you want. And then usually the example they give is that you have these widescreen space scenes or whatever. But for me, it's more about the fact that you don't have to compromise anything. So I was just listening to David Lynch's autobiography, and he was talking about how disappointed he was when he made Blue Velvet, that he wanted to use a song by, I think, This Mortal Coil, Song of the Siren, and he wanted that in the movie, and they couldn't afford it. But he was obsessed with it, and he's like, I gotta have this. Well, you don't have that in comics. You don't, well, I mean, first off, you're not gonna worry about having a song anyway, but you don't have to worry about where you're going to pluck other things from, or, you know, is the cinematographer going to understand my vision? Is the actor that I hired going to portray this character the way that I envisioned it when I wrote it? Like, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. So the budget part of it is true, but it's also just the idea that you're not locked into the limitations of anything else around you, other than, you know, your own ability to draw, obviously. But if you have a certain skill set, or you tailor your skill set to the kind of work that you want to do, it is unlimited, completely unlimited.
It's a medium where you could really also do the things that movies can't. I mean, I know we live in the age of CGI and big Marvel movies and big comic book movies where you can show Spider-Man swinging around the city and it does look fluid.
Yeah.
But so many times I'll watch these big budget comic movies, and while they are great and kudos to them, I still would rather read a comic.
I'm really weird about this. I'm there with you for the most part. And the reason I would say I'm with you on that is because if you're watching a big budget CGI filled Spider-Man movie, no matter how great they make that costume, it's not going to look like the John Romita version of that character. If you love the Todd McFarlane version, you're never going to get that in a movie. And the one that everybody praised was the Into the Spider-Verse, the animated one, because they just cribbed all of this comic book art. So you've got Kingpin, who looks like Bill Sienkiewicz's version. Well, that's great, but I'd still love to just sit and look at Bill Sienkiewicz's, Daredevil Love and War and look at the way he painted Kingpin, not somebody else's interpretation of that. On the other hand, if you were going to ask me, like, would you rather sit down and spend 6 hours reading new Avengers comics in the big omnibus, or would you rather spend 6 hours watching the last two Avengers movies? I'll watch the movies any day of the week, because I just, unless it's an artist that I really like, I'll read, the Kree Skrull Wars, the old John Romita stuff, or not John Romita, excuse me, John Buscema, before I'd want to sit and watch a movie. But in terms of like modern Avengers comics, I don't have a whole lot of interest in that, and I'd much rather watch Avengers Endgame than read something. And that's not to denigrate that stuff. I just personally don't have any interest in it.
Did you read the Hickman stuff?
No, I never did.
That was really fantastic. I was out of superhero books for such a long time, and then I picked that up. I was never really an Avengers guy.
Okay.
But I picked that up because I liked Jonathan Hickman's Shield. He did that Shield miniseries.
Okay.
And I read some of his Image stuff prior to that, so I gave it a shot, and it was so good, man.
I've heard great things about it, and I don't mean, well, I'll tell you something. What got me back into mainstream comics was the Brian Michael Bendis, David Finch Avengers.
I never read that.
The thing that grabbed me was, first off, I'd heard about Brian Michael Bendis just from his name getting mentioned in the Comics Journal. So even though I wasn't paying attention to mainstream comics in the 90s and early aughts, I was still aware on a peripheral level of what was happening. So I knew all these names. I knew, when Jonathan Hickman started, and Rick Remender and all those guys, just from seeing their names thrown around in the Comics Journal. And Brian Michael Bendis was one of those people. So that had me intrigued so much. I knew he was doing Daredevil too, and people really liked that and compared it to the Frank Miller stuff. Mm-hmm. But David Finch's art was so funky and weird to me, and I know a lot of people hate it, but I was just like, I can't believe there's somebody who draws like this working on this mainstream book.
Is that the where all the enemies escape from the raft and it's pre-Civil War? Oh yeah, that's good.
Starts out with Vision showing up, and he's like, these things are coming out of his mouth, or maybe that's Ultron. So something. It's been a while since I've read it, but yeah, it's pretty brutal. The things that happen in it, and now, of course, that stuff happens in the movies. Yes. And but Finch's art was what really grabbed me on that. So if there's a good Hickman run that's got some great art on it, I would check that out.
Sure. Are you reading X-Men right now?
No, I'm not really reading any mainstream books at the moment.
You doing your own thing?
Pretty much. It's more I just don't have time, and my eyesight has gotten really bad over the last year or so. Okay. So it's difficult for me to sit and draw all day and then sit and read a comic book, because I just need to give my eyes a break. So I'm usually just watching TV, and I don't have to worry about focusing on it.
The Bendis Daredevil stuff is what got me into him. That and Powers.
Okay.
How many hours a day are you drawing?
At least 8. More if I can fit it in, because I'm, one of the deals when we moved here, because we moved to Chicago because of my wife's job, and she puts in 10 to 12 hours a day. So part of my responsibility is cooking dinner and taking care of if we need to get groceries or anything like that. So I'm balancing taking care of that stuff with drawing, and then like right now, today, I spent the whole day just processing packaging orders from this new book.
I know. I saw that it was a real success. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. I was shocked. I think part of it may be people seeing the prices on these other books and knowing that I do tend to just, let a print run out and that's it. So I do think that there may be some of that, like, I got to get this now because this is going to sell out and then I may never get it again. which I'm not purposefully doing that. It's just the nature of how I put my stuff out. So that may have something to do with it.
And you said you have a like an art dealer. I see that a lot. I follow a lot of them on Instagram. I'm pretty sure I follow your dealer as well. That's like, is that a new thing? I guess not new, but I guess there's more exposure of it because it's social media, where a lot of artists are booked doing commissions, right? A lot of you guys like are just really, really socked with a lot of commission orders, aren't you?
Yeah, that's where the bulk of my income is from right now.
Cool.
And there's a few different art reps that have pushed that. It started mainly. I don't want to claim to be an expert on any of this stuff, but I listen to a few podcasts where they talk about the original art market and the commission market. And I think a big part of it was through conventions. Most artists would offer a 8.5 by 11 head sketch that you could get. People started creating these jam pieces. So they'd go from table to table. They'd set it up with an artist ahead of time and say, hey, I want to do an Avengers jam piece. So I want to get a head sketch in these smaller spots from X amount of artists at shows. And they would get to a point where I think a lot of artists, especially myself, it's difficult enough for me just to do my own work and juggle communicating with collectors who may want something. So it made sense for me to get a rep just to handle that side of it. So I didn't feel the pressure of like, oh man, I got 5 emails I got to answer from people who are wanting to know what's going on. I can just focus on the art.
Yeah.
Obviously there were no shows last year, so that I think made the online aspect of it grow even more, because people had saved up money to go to shows to get head sketches, and they end up getting them online instead.
What do you get requests for the most? Who are you drawing all day?
My rep Cam with Inky Knuckles is the group that I'm with. He said I'm becoming known as an X-Men guy for some reason. And I think just I've done a few pieces that have been highly detailed, and so he gets a few X-Men requests. Then I just did this Dark Knight Returns piece, which I think I got the biggest response out of anything I posted in the last year on Instagram from this piece. So that may be something that I start doing, which I have mixed emotions about that, because I just that book is so much about the art. So the idea of reinterpreting that art in your own style, there's a disconnect for me there, because it's like, well, they nailed it. Like that team, that's what that book is to me. But I understand it too, that especially with that book, you can't get original pages from that. So really all you can do is get recreations of those pages.
It's like a good cover song.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So have you been collecting anything yourself during lockdown?
Yeah, I still collect movie posters. I got a few things that I've been looking for a while. Mainly my interest there is 70s drive-in and grindhouse type movies.
Wow. Those are hand painted usually, right?
Usually, yeah.
The images, I'm not the poster, but the image is exactly. A hand painted poster, right?
Yeah, beautiful stuff. And my qualifier when I buy that material is that it's got to be a movie that I've seen. Even if the poster is fantastic, it's got amazing art. If I haven't actually seen the movie, I'm not going to buy it. Hopefully it's a movie that I really, really like. But if it's a movie I've seen that's just okay, but the poster is spectacular, I'll buy the poster. And a lot of times when I do go to conventions, I'll look for a dealer that's got movie posters, and that's usually where I spend my money when I'm at a show.
What's your gem?
I'm really into this Brazilian director named Jose Mojica Marins, also known as Coffin Joe. He worked primarily in the 70s and just did these insane movies. And he has this character with his top hat and these long fingernails. And he would do personal appearances as that character. And so finding actual ephemeral material from that stuff is pretty difficult. But I did get a poster from one of the films off of eBay a few years ago, and I got it professionally framed. That was a grail for me, is getting a Coffin Joe poster.
Nice.
So,
Is it one of those oversized ones?
It is. It's a little bit, yeah. It's definitely bigger than an American one sheet.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't just put it in a nice IKEA poster frame. I had to get it. The frame costs more than the poster itself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
And are there any other things that you collect besides movie posters? Do you still collect comics?
Yeah, basically what happens is I'll find a little black hole of work by an artist that I wasn't aware of. So I just recently found out that Rudy Nebres, this Filipino artist, had inked a bunch of issues of Doctor Strange.
Uh-huh.
I think in the late 70s. And he inked over like Jim Starlin. I want to say there was a Carmine Infantino issue, but I don't think he worked for Marvel. Anyway, there's probably a run of like 10 issues that Rudy Nebres worked on. So I found that out, immediately put in an order and filled in all the holes on that. So that's, if I'm collecting any comics, it's usually based on the artist that worked on it.
Is that the Doctor Strange one that Steve Englehart wrote?
I believe so. Yeah,
I'm reading that right now. Wow.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah,
it's
one from
like
74.
Some of the 30-cent issues.
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty sure that's Englehart doing that.
Those are wild. I'm really enjoying those.
Yeah,
we're talking the same ones.
Yep. But I'll be honest with you. I don't. I usually don't read them. I just flip through them and look at the art, and try to find some panels that I really like to put up on Instagram. Mm-hmm. The other thing I do collect, and every few months, whenever I get a nice batch of commissions and get paid, I've been buying the IDW Artist Edition books.
Those are really nice.
Yeah, I love those. I've got maybe, I can look at it right now. I've got about 10 of them right now. I just got the Dan Klaus original art one from Fantagraphics, the studio edition.
The big one, right?
The big one, yeah.
Yeah, I bought that. It's gorgeous.
Oh, it's fantastic.
I have nowhere to put it, but it's amazing.
Oh yeah, I've got this giant IKEA shelf, and I can see the shelf is bowing, and I've got to figure out some other place to put these books. I think I've reached the max on that. Yeah, and I've got the Jack Davis one, which is also that size, the 2-up size books, and that Jack Davis one just blows my mind.
It's so cool that they're starting to release all of these artist edition books and these oversized kind of they're almost like gallery editions. Mm-hmm. They really put the work into a different context. I know I'm circling back to that, that kind of lame fine art label, which I really am. It's not that. It kind of puts something. It places too much seriousness on it, whereas it's really something more to be delighted over and kind of party with. Some of these guys would kind of cringe at the thought of their stuff being fine art.
Yeah, and they would probably cringe at the thought of somebody looking at it so intently. Like,
yes,
when I'm creating a page for my comic, I know that it's going to be sold. That's just part of the deal. Like, this is going to be in somebody else's hands, and I'm thinking of that constantly. I want this to look as perfect as possible. These things are covered in paste ups and covered in, you can see where they redrew something, or they just like. I'm shocked at the Dark Knight Returns book when I look through that at just how sloppy some of those backgrounds are.
I haven't flipped through that. That's on my list. That one and the Born Again one.
The Born Again is fantastic. That book is amazing to look through, and almost the polar opposite of the Dark Knight Returns, just in terms of the it's not detail. It's not about the detail. It's just about the rendering, where I think maybe with Dark Knight Returns, part of it was speed. Part of it was knowing that Lynn Varley was going to color it. So it was like, let's leave the background as loose as possible. I know that Klaus Janson had farmed out a lot of that work, and supposedly Todd McFarlane did some of the background inking on Dark Knight Returns. So that could be part of it, is just he's handing it to someone like, you need to get this done as quickly as you can because we got to turn these in. Because Frank Miller was working on 4 things while he was doing that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that when he was working on Dark Knight Returns, I think he was also working on, he was writing Electra Assassin. The Daredevil Love and War graphic novel, I think, was happening, being developed at that same time. And then I think he was writing Born Again.
Wow.
At the same time he was doing Dark Knight Returns. So, you know, I don't know. It's a crazy thing, but the Mazzucchelli stuff, you know that he realized, like, first off, this is going to be poorly printed, so some of this stuff doesn't matter. But he's just got such a deft hand with the way that he would do, you know, just a very simple looking background. But he knew that if I just do a quick brush stroke, thick brush stroke, that's going to represent this shelf or whatever he needed. It wasn't sloppy, but it was just, it's insane how well he understood how that art was going to look when it was reduced and printed.
Yeah, he had an eye for the layouts are really they're kind of cutting edge.
Yeah, for
layouts
sure.
and his design work and his staging of his characters, this blocking. There's really nothing close to it beforehand. And it kind of it really was brand new. It looks so fresh. Even to this day, it looks fresh.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it's a shame, you know, there are plenty of artists that you can point to that you could say, oh, they work in a Mazzucchelli style. And you can see it in their line work. You can see it in the way they render figures and their shadows and everything, but they're missing something. There's something about Mazzucchelli that goes beyond the way that he rendered characters and more into just an expressionism. And when you see the later work that he did, like Rubber Blanket, you understand why that's visible in the Daredevil stuff. Because he wasn't necessarily thinking, I want to make this as realistic as possible, I want to make this look like a movie or whatever. He was cartooning.
Yeah, right.
But he was being told, you have to work within this style because that's what everybody else is doing at Marvel right now. So he's like, okay, I'll do that. But his mind was working in an entirely different realm than what other people were doing. And I have to apologize. My cat is, of course.
That's all good. I didn't even notice. You got meows back there? Is that what's going on?
Yeah. Sorry. She's, you know, this is her time to roam around, I guess.
Oh, good.
Apologies.
You really see that his full capabilities with the Asterios polyp. I don't really want to get on I said Mazzucchelli. It's Mazzucchelli. How do you pronounce it?
I'd seen somewhere there was a Marvel thing where they showed you how to pronounce all the bullpen's names, and that's how I learned how to say Sienkiewicz. So I had read Mazzucchelli, but I couldn't.
Okay. We'll go with that. You really see his fullest, what's actually possible within comics with the Asterios polyp. That's a wonderful, wonderful book by him.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it's one of those things where you wish an artist like that was doing work more frequently, but you do understand that there's a lot of thought going into this. It wasn't just something that he threw out to get done as quickly as possible. And I don't know if he's working on anything else. I mean, that book's like 10 years old at this point.
Yeah.
I'm sure he's done something and I'm probably unaware of it, but
Where do you see Cankor going?
Well, I'm at a point now where I really need to take a break from it. This new book is more or less an epilogue to the Ad House book. It was when I was putting the Ad House book together, I knew we wanted to fill it out with some extra pages, and I was under a pretty tight deadline to get those extra pages done. So I was filling in story elements that I thought would maybe make the narrative clearer. But I knew that there was something else I wanted to add to it. And then this thing happened. The book is called Anamnesis, is the subtitle of this new Cankor book. And I think it's a nice way to just put an end cap on that bit of story. I don't know what I'll do with Cankor after that. The next thing I work on is going to be my horror comic, which is called Sweet Sepulchre.
Cool.
I've got an idea for an expanded version of that. What I've been doing with that is just mini comics with short stories and random BS in there. But I do have a longer concept that I'm going to start working on next. Hopefully get that out by next spring.
And do you look at your past? Are you still looking towards your past for these stories, or are you in a whole new terrain?
I would love to not be so internal about it, because everything is related to my mental problems, emotional problems, past decision making. And when I had an idea for this Sweet Sepulchre comic, and as I was putting it together, I was like, man, I can't escape this. This is about my childhood. This story is about growing up with my dad and being a monster kid. As much as you could be one in the 70s. I know monster kids are really from the 50s, but that's what my dad was. So it's about this lineage of being a monster kid without telling that story. I don't want it to be about my dad and then me. It's about these other characters, but it's all tied into that.
Do you mean when you say monster kid, like a bad behaved kid, or somebody who's into monsters and monster movies?
Yeah, that phrase being used for like the kids in the 50s that were reading Famous Monsters magazine.
Got it.
And watching, shock theater and loving all that stuff, running around dressed as Frankenstein's monster and things like that. So, yeah.
That's cool. Probably wasn't cool in school.
Actually, you know what? For me, it was, surprisingly. Like, somehow I was able to parlay that geekiness into being accepted by the popular kids. Like, I was invited to parties and told, like, bring the grossest movie you can find, because they knew I was really into horror movies. I'd walk around junior high wearing a Texas Chainsaw Massacre shirt. Now, I'm not saying I was prom king or anything like that. I did go to parties and stuff though with the jocks, and was known as like the kid who would bring cool movies. So
do you collect old movies too?
Yeah, that's the other thing. I had a decent VHS collection for a long time, but once companies like Vinegar Syndrome and Severin started doing these really nice restorations of the movies that I like, I just was like, there's no point in me collecting VHS anymore. So I've got a decent sized collection of stuff from Something Weird and Vinegar Syndrome, Synapse, Arrow.
What are those companies?
Oh, these are all like boutique Blu-ray companies. Oh. So there's this trend now in physical media for movies that somewhat follows the Criterion model, where there's a lot of really cool extras on these movies. They do great restorations. They get commentaries from authors and the original filmmakers if they're still around.
Wow.
So Vinegar Syndrome, I think, is the one that I'm most interested in, because they cover a wider range of eras. So you could get stuff going back to the 60s from Spain, and then you could get a movie from the United States in the early 80s that was some cheesy slasher movie. So yeah, that kind of stuff is it's hard for me to let go of that. I know everybody's switching to streaming, and I've got a buddy who's like, why are you buying Blu-rays still? And it's like, because I want all that extra stuff, and I want the really nice packaging, and I want to have a shelf full of, this company's stuff, because they make the spines to look really nice together on a shelf. I'm still a sucker for that stuff.
What do you think that is?
I mean, for me, it's going back to the, being at the comic book store and seeing a collection of something for the first time. I had a friend when I was in first grade, and his mom collected they're like covers for electrical equipment, like these glass bells essentially that would go on like the power lines. But every state had different ones. She had this whole collection of them on the wall in the basement. It was the first time I ever saw a collection laid out like that. Then later I had a friend in school whose dad collected John Deere memorabilia. And he had a whole room, and all along you just saw all this John Deere stuff. Later on in high school, there was a kid that knew that I was into comics because he saw me wearing like a Spider-Man shirt or something. And I went over to his house, and he had this huge collection, and it was all cataloged. And So just that's always appealed to me, is just seeing something like that that's just, well curated, looks nice, beautifully designed. It's great.
I agree. I'm the same way. There's some type of context that comes out of grouping something together with other parts of it.
Yep.
Kind of get a story, you get a mood, you get some you have something to work towards.
Yeah,
You have some sort of a job, there's like a responsibility, you're on a quest in a way.
Yeah, for
There's
sure.
joy in that. And then when you have it and it's all together and it's, as complete as you would like it, whether or not there is ever the sense of something being complete for a collector, I don't know. But the having them grouped on a shelf, there's really there's something very satisfying about it.
Absolutely. And I think that the one thing I would say, I don't consider myself to be a completist, partly because I like to still always have something to hunt for. So even, talking about the Mazzucchelli Daredevil stuff, I only just got the first issue that he did like a month ago.
Wow.
I didn't even realize it was missing from my collection. I just had never even made a list. It was just like I'd, flip through something like, oh, Mazzucchelli did this, I need to fill this hole. But the thing that really killed being a completist for me was in the late 90s, when DVDs first started, Something Weird Video out of Seattle that put out all these exploitation movies on VHS. They made a deal with Image Entertainment to put out these DVD collections of all their movies. And I got in on the ground floor with that. I was like, this is super cool. There's all these double and triple features, and they put all these cool extras. And the Something Weird logo is this little guy. I don't know where they got it from, but it's this little man in a suit. So when you see all of the spines together on a shelf, you see that little guy, and then they have an image from the poster up in the corner. So those DVDs were coming out like a couple a month, and I was making sure that I got pretty much every one. There were a few titles I wasn't super interested in. I don't like anything with like rednecks or moonshine. I stayed away from that. I usually don't like anything from the 30s. So, if there was like a Reefer Madness type movie, I didn't necessarily get that right away.
Yeah.
But at a certain point, I was like, man, I have almost the whole collection. So I need to just finish this. I need to have all the Something Weird DVDs on the shelf together. And they put out this double feature from this American distributor named K. Gordon Murray, who would import all this stuff from Mexico. And they put together this double feature. I forget what was on it. I think Doctor of Doom, which was this Mexican wrestling movie, and I forget what the other movie was on there, but that came out. And then K. Gordon Murray's estate found out about it, because a lot of Something Weird stuff was technically public domain, but some of it was still owned by people. So they would come forward and say, hey, we actually own that movie. So the K. Gordon Murray people came in and said, no, you can't release those. So that movie immediately became out of print, that particular DVD. Well, they had a follow-up, and I guess they did some test pressings of it, because I was on this movie forum and this guy had one. He had found it used in a record store.
Wow.
And he brought it up. He's like, I got this thing. Has anybody else seen this before? And I'm looking at it. I was like, oh man, like that exists. That means my collection will never be complete, because immediately people swarmed on this guy saying, hey, will you sell that to me? And I wanted it, and a bunch of other people wanted it on this movie forum. And he knew right away. He's like, oh man, I'm going to hold on to this.
Yeah.
So knowing that I was never going to have a complete collection, I was just like, forget it. I think they put out like 143 titles, and I had probably 135. So I never bothered with the remainder of that, and I've sold most of it since then. But
sold it separately?
Pretty much, yeah. Anything that I saw was going out of print and was hard to get, I'd sell on eBay and flip it for a decent amount of money.
It's so funny. You just threw your hands up. I get it.
Yeah.
You can't have it all. Like, it's just, you might as well not go on anymore.
Yeah, there's no reason.
You mentioned something interesting, that you went back and you bought that Born Again issue.
Mm-hmm.
Did you find that there was less joy in acquiring that so many years later, and it wasn't something that you originally bought on the shelf?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was more of just like, well, it was $3 or whatever. I can't remember what issue number it was, like 208 or something like that. And
Yeah.
the early Mazzucchelli stuff, other people were inking him. So it's not the Born Again. It's like it was his very first issue
The
way
few
prior to
issues
the Born
before it
Again.
properly starts.
Yeah, excuse me. Um, so it was just more about like, I got it. I flipped through it when I got it and just stuck it in a bag and put it in a box. I'm sure I'll look through it at some point, but
Yeah, there's stuff that I've lost just in moves. Some of my parts of my collection that I lost, like they're just
mhm.
gone.
Yeah,
And I could go to eBay and buy them, but like it's not going to be the same.
yeah,
Part of the joy was that I had them. I remember buying them off the rack. The
yeah.
feeling that I had when I was reading it, and just buying it now, it just would seem so lifeless to me.
Yeah, I agree. I going back to Coffin Joe, that Brazilian director. There was a box set that came from Brazil. Everything on it's in Portuguese, and there was a company called Luminous Film and Video Work. I think I got it from that would import all of these weird movies from other countries. And I got this thing, and it was signed by the director in gold. And when we moved to Chicago, I was so worried about some of my collectibles getting destroyed in the move, and because there was a moving company that was going to take care of all that for us. I was like, I'm going to package this stuff up and I'm going to put it in unmarked boxes, or if I've got, we've got a can opener box, I'll stick some DVDs in there so that they'll just get thrown in. And it took us about 3 months to unpack, and I could not find that Coffin Joe box set anywhere. And I was just so depressed about it because it was, it's way out of print, signed. You're never going to get it signed. He had passed away a few years ago, so that's an impossibility. But then I was looking on eBay and I thought, well, let me see if I can find another one just to have it. And there was a record store near where we lived in Denver that had one for sale on eBay for like $75. And I thought, man, did one of the moving people steal it and sell it to this used record store?
Right.
So I immediately bought it, hoping that it was my copy. But it just so happened it wasn't. It wasn't signed. And I could tell by the markings and stuff on it, because it had a little more shelf wear than mine did, that it wasn't my copy. But just very odd that somebody got rid of theirs within a month or so of me losing mine in Denver. So, but when I did finally get it, it was like, I just threw it on the shelf. Like, it doesn't really mean anything now.
Right. But for
Yeah,
some reason, it would have kept you up at night because you didn't have it anymore, right?
exactly. Yeah, yeah.
What would you take in a fire? What would be the first thing you would grab besides your cat?
Besides this cat, wow, I have an original Jim Woodring page that I did purchase. We had refinanced our house, and my wife and I are both like, hey, let's take some money and we'll get something just totally extravagant that we wouldn't normally buy. So I spent like $800 on this page. That's the most I've ever spent on any original art, but that's the treasure to me, and I would definitely grab that for sure.
What is it from?
It's from Weathercraft, which is one of the more recent Frank books that he did with Fantagraphics.
Cool.
And I the page is of his character Manhog, who I most identify with in that book. I have a Manhog tattoo. So when I saw it, the art rep or the art dealer who had it on eBay, it's one of the less expensive pages because it doesn't have the character Frank on it, but it was perfect for me just because it was all Manhog. It was great. So I was very excited to get that.
Do you have any like dream merch or any dream collectible for your comics that you would like to put out?
I was working with a local guy here on doing an action figure.
Yes.
Something, a vinyl figure that looks like it was made in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And we were really struggling with figuring out exactly what we wanted to look like. And then I just got very caught up with commissions and working on this new book. So I put that way on the back burner. But I do want to get back together with him and work that out, because I've got some ideas that I think would be pretty cool for that.
Yeah, your drawings are so dynamic. The poses that you put your characters in, They're
Oh, thanks.
tailor-made for a figure on a shelf.
Yeah, for sure. And the thing that I thought would be cool is, I always like the figures where you could take off body parts and swap them around, like the old Micronauts. Baron Karza and Force Commander had those magnetic body parts that you could take off. So something like that would be cool, where you could pull off Kankor's arm and put the pink droopy melty one on instead, or put a mask on him or something like that. Yeah.
Do you collect toys?
Oh yeah. Yep.
Do you?
Yeah, I've really dialed back on that because I was going crazy there for a while. And really, I mean, if it's got to be something I'm really excited about. So years ago, I was working at a print shop. I'd been at this job for 18 years, and I just quit one day. And I had all this financial debt from buying all this collectible stuff, and I was making a decent amount of money at this place, but I quit. And it took me a while to find another job, so I started to have to sell stuff. Mm-hmm. And I had this articulated 12-inch doll that was put out by Celestial Pictures when they put out this Shaw Brothers movie called Inframan, which was this Chinese, basically a ripoff of Ultraman. But it's this great movie. I loved it. I remember Roger Ebert talked about this movie as being his video pick of the week back in the 80s. And as soon as I rented it and saw it, I fell in love with it. And then when these figures came out, they only made, I think, 104 of each. There was Inframan and then one of the villain's henchmen. And so I immediately bought them. I think they were probably like $150 at the time, but I had to sell those when I quit my job.
Yeah.
Super hard to find. And I hate the movie. Like, I don't hate the movie, but I never wanted to watch the movie again because it would just depress me thinking about it. And I have a one sheet for it. I have a tie poster for it. And I don't even hang them because it's just like, I had to get rid of those toys. I'm always going to be reminded of that. And I finally found somebody had the henchman toy on eBay, and I picked it up for a really good price.
Great.
So that was something that I was like, normally I wouldn't do this, but that's another replacement item. And I did feel really good about that. That was something where I did, because I was like, finally got this back, watched the movie again for the first time in like 8 years. So
was the figure in good condition?
Oh yeah. This person, it was sad because in the listing they talked about it was the person's kids that were selling it. This guy had passed away, and they were piecing out his collection and selling it on eBay, and he had kept it in the box, fantastic shape. It's beautiful. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, very happy with that.
I've spoken with a few toy collectors so far. I made the jump like early 2000s from like the McFarlane stuff just right into like Michael Lau and Bounty Hunter and all like the stuff from Asia. And I've been paying a lot of attention recently to toys for some reason, because there are just so many being released. And I came to the conclusion that it is a horrible time to be in toys.
Yeah.
If you are into them, because there's new stuff all the time. It's super expensive.
Yep.
It's really awesome. They've gotten really, really good at it. Even the mainstream companies I'm talking about. They're just relentless in the releases.
Yeah. There's plenty of stuff where I'm like, oh man, I would love to have this, but I would be flat broke, or I would be having to, sell something every week to get some of these. Like Unbox Industries puts out fantastic stuff, and they put out a martial law figure.
Oh wow.
That was something I had to have. But yeah, I get it. I completely get it. There's a Japanese vinyl toy shop here in Chicago I haven't been in yet because I'm afraid to. Because it's just, I know it's full of good stuff.
Yes.
Yeah, it's crazy.
It's dangerous. But they look so good on a shelf.
Mm-hmm.
They really do.
Yeah, and that's what I try to tell myself lately is like, you know what? You should just focus on creating and not worry so much about buying stuff from other people. So I just, I use that in the back of my mind and just think, be very selective about what you buy, as opposed to just get everything that you want. Because again, that's what derailed me for so long, because I was just so concerned about, I would sit up at night, with movie catalogs and just making lists of all the movies that I wanted to get out of these catalogs. And I'd go to my reference book and like, okay, this, weird Lucio Fulci Western that I need to look that up and find out if I want to order that or not. It was like such a waste of time, but it seemed so important in the moment.
Yeah.
But it was that collector
That's something that's really true. The dynamic of, are you a consumer or a creator?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with being a consumer, because I mean, we talk about collecting, and that is hyper consumerism, and there is some sort of artistry, I suppose, maybe more lifestyle art,
Sure.
Art adjacent lifestyle that you're involved in. But yeah, it's one of those things where it does take up your headspace, and it is the polar opposite of what a creative person should be doing.
Exactly. It is. Yeah. It was really a bad time in my life for that, and it was fulfilling. I mean, it was scratching an itch for sure, but it just wasted so much time. And I look at just how much my art has changed in the last 8 years because I'm drawing every day, and I think, man, if I had, I'm 48 now, and I've really only been doing this since I was 40. Well, maybe like 38. So like the last 10 years. If from the time I was 18 till I was 38, instead of, going to I used to spend my weekends in this Vietnamese gift shop that had all these Hong Kong movies you could rent. And I'd make these lists of all these movies, and I'd go there and I'd spend hours, and I'd come home with bags of tapes, and I'd make copies of all these movies, and I'd spend time drawing out the labels, the title of the movie, so it all looked good on my shelf. And just like, God, what a waste of time doing that.
Do you think it somehow has seeped into the work?
It makes me not letter. I don't like lettering. I spent all that time hand drawing letters for the titles of these VHS tapes. I just found one in my crawl space and was looking at it. I'm like, God, this label probably took me 2 hours to make. It's so dumb. So yeah, that's why I use computer lettering, because it's so time consuming to hand letter stuff.
So you really weren't cartooning prior to 39, 38?
I had sketchbooks, and I would draw when I felt compelled. There were times like I have to draw. I just always would have to draw. But I was so unhappy with the results that a lot of times those sketchbooks ended up in the trash.
Mm-hmm.
And every now and then I would, print something off at work and maybe pass it out at a, record store. The record store near where I lived had a little shelf where you could put flyers and stuff. And so I'd put my drawings on there. Just, I don't know. I knew I wanted people to see it, but it just never felt like it was worth doing.
It's very Gen X.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Very Gen X. Like, also something that you said about how you wouldn't buy the movie poster if you didn't like the movie, even if you liked the movie poster.
Yeah.
Those rules, like I have such similar rules to these things in my life as well. I totally understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
And nobody else cares. I mean, other collectors understand it, but that's the thing with collecting too, is that in your mind, you're always like, man, I'm going to pretend like I'm walking into this room for the first time and seeing all these movies. Well, anybody who would actually care about my movie collection probably owns all those movies anyway. Yeah. They're not even going to look at them.
No.
But, that's in my mind. I always was like, oh, what if, this person got to see this? What would they think about my decision to put these two movies together? Nobody cares.
It would be 4 people, 3 of which you wouldn't even get along with.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I'm the same way. You think like, oh, if somebody who would see this would know that I'm really into this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like an anxiety.
Yeah.
It's a neurosis, really.
Yeah.
And that goes across the board too, like sneakers and watches and boats and original art. It's all the same.
For sure. Yeah.
No one cares.
Yeah. Nobody cares. And I think that it's liberating to know that on a certain level. And I think that also keeps me from being a completist, because I realize like, it doesn't matter if I have every single one of these toys, or if I have every single video that this company puts out. It's not, doesn't serve any purpose, because I've seen those people. I've been on movie forums and seen the person who has basically recreated a video store in their basement with all the old shelves, and they have every Wizard videotape and every Continental videotape, and they're all really nicely shelved next to each other, and it's cool to look at, but I'm going to look at it for 2 minutes and then I go about my day.
Right. Yeah,
You know?
I've reached a new point with myself where I'm comfortable with just admiring. I don't have to own.
Yeah.
That was a hard bump to get over.
Well, the internet definitely helps with that. You know,
Yes.
you can get your fix looking at somebody else's stuff, and then you realize you don't need to have it all.
Yes. Speaking of no one cares, does your wife care about any of this stuff?
No, not really. She doesn't hate it by any means. But she's not a clutter person, and she's not. I remember when we got our first apartment together. She moved in with me, and then we got our own apartment that we chose together for the first time. And we're putting books on the shelf. There were built-in bookshelves in this old converted mansion we were in. And I collect this figure from Ultraman, a character named Pigmon, who's this weird little monster. And I took one of my Pigmon figures and I put it on the bookshelf. And I turned around and she's standing behind me, and she just shook her head like, nope, you're not doing that. But you know, she's fine with me having movie posters in our living room, and she's pretty cool about it, you know.
Yeah. With me, my wife's a really good sport. But I know now that if she says nothing, that means she likes it. She's never gonna be like, oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
If she says nothing, I'm in the clear and I should probably get it.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, you know. And my wife is she makes her own clothes.
Cool.
Just does really, really great work. And you know, so she's super creative in that way. And she loves fashion, and she'll buy a really cool pair of shoes that, to me, I'm like, well, I would take that money and buy some original artwork with it. But you know, she appreciates the design and the styling and the way the shoes were crafted. You know, she's that way with that kind of stuff.
I should have her on to talk about her shoes.
Yeah, absolutely.
There are women that are totally I'm searching for the word here, but shoes, stilettos, and just like you have sneakerheads that are guys, and also females that are sneakerheads, but you also have women who are into heels and all sorts of women's shoes. Yeah, that's a cool thing too.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the craftsmanship of it is amazing, you know, because I'll look at this stuff and it's like, I completely get it. I completely understand. You know, I only wear Chuck Taylors, and the main reason, not so much the fashion, is just it lets my feet breathe, so my feet don't get too sweaty. But you know, I every now and then I'll splurge on a funky pair of Chuck Taylors.
Nice. Yeah. Do you find the mark of a good cartoonist in being their ability to draw shoes and feet and hands, I guess, for that matter too?
Well, my thing with hands is always like, everybody has, well, for the most part, if you're drawing, you're likely going to have at least one hand. You don't have to. You draw with your feet, other ways of drawing, but most people have two hands. So I've always felt like, and you've got constant reference that you can look at. Most people, I think, should be able to draw decent hands. Feet, on the other hand, they're difficult for some reason. I don't know. You know, the other thing you always hear is drawing horses. If an artist is really good at drawing horses, that's pretty remarkable, and I do agree with that. So I would say horses more than anything. If an artist draws a really good horse, that's the sign of a good artist.
Yeah. And what makes the mark of a good, like, hero's costume, or like a hero's look? Protagonist. Let's not say hero.
Yeah, I mean, I think the silhouette. You know, if you can look at it just completely blacked out, filled in with no detail, and you can tell who the character is, that's always going to be, you know, I mean, I think that's why people like Wolverine and Batman so much. I don't care about the character of Batman. I don't care about Bruce Wayne and Dick Grayson and Alfred and all that stuff. It's the silhouette of that costume and the fact that you can do anything with it. I love There's a issue 400 of Batman is a jam issue with maybe 20 different artists, and every artist different.
The Sienkiewicz cover.
Sienkiewicz, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a huge deal for me to just know that you can interpret this however you want. There was a style guide, obviously. They wanted DC at that point wanted Batman to be recognizable in a certain way. But after Dark Knight Returns came out, I think it was more in vogue to do your own take on that stuff. And now everybody has their own version of Batman and everybody has their own version of Wolverine.
Yeah.
But I think a costume that allows you to do that is what makes it cool.
So what's next? Are you eyeballing anything on eBay right now? Is there anything you're on the hunt for?
Oh, after Richard Corbin died, I thought I should start getting some Richard Corbin collections. But, the prices, of course, skyrocketed because he was gone. And so I gave up on that pretty quickly. Yeah, I mean, I've always got my eye on the artist editions. There's a few that I definitely want to get. I almost pulled the trigger on the Walt Simonson Thor a couple times over the last few months, and that's probably the next one. I ended up getting the Mike Zeck Marvel stories instead.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So
I gotta check that out.
Yeah, it's great stuff. It's got the first 2 issues of the Punisher limited series, a couple issues of the Kraven's Last Hunt. It's beautiful.
Yeah, he's my Spider-Man. He's the guy who drew my Spider-Man. I mean, I was prime McFarlane age, but I got into seriously collecting comics with Kraven's Last Hunt.
Yeah, I was thinking of this the other day, like an artist that I wish would have been on a certain book is I would have loved to have seen Mike Zeck do a long run on Marvel Team Up, because you'd get him doing Spider-Man every issue, and then you'd also get him doing some other character every single issue.
Yeah. Is he still around?
Yeah, he primarily just does recreations. He really pioneered that, I think, of offering recreations of his classic stuff, because he was somebody who was selling all of his originals when he was working on him. So like he sold some guy all the original Punisher issues for super cheap, like right after we did it. So now, of course, he's in a position of like, man, I wish I had all that art. So what he's been doing in the last, I would say 10 years is recreating like Kraven's Last Hunt cover, but maybe plugging Batman in.
Really?
Yeah. That's where he's making a lot of money, convention appearances. And I think he might be an art director somewhere.
Wow.
Doing animation or something.
Oh, I have to look up those. It's almost like a remix in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I love that. I got to check that out.
Yeah.
All right, Matthew. So Cankor sold out. Can't get any more?
Well, so it's not technically sold out. Well, the Ad House book is definitely sold out.
Yeah.
And in fact, Chris unfortunately just announced that he's shutting down Ad House as of last week. He's done. He's doing his 100th book and maybe one more. But so if that book gets reprinted, it'll be through me via Kickstarter, most likely. But the new book that just came out, I stopped selling it on my site because I wanted to make sure that I had copies for stores. So technically, I'm sold out of them, but stores like Arcane Comics in Seattle, Gutter Pop Comics, I forget where they're at. I've been in talks with maybe a dozen or so stores that are going to be carrying it for a while. And then my art rep in Canada, he's going to be selling them to Canadian buyers.
That's great. Do you have any shops in LA that you sell to?
I'll have to check.
My favorite closed down a few years ago that I could totally see your books at is Meltdown, but it's gone.
Meltdown. Yeah, I don't know if I ever had any books in there. So they closed completely. I knew they closed the comedy section. I didn't realize they closed the whole store. Wow. Okay.
R.I.P. One of the best comic shops I've ever been to.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, it was a place that I don't think I ever sent anything to Meltdown. I've been lucky in that stores have reached out to me to pick up my books, as opposed to me having to, ask somebody, hey, do you have a consignment program or whatever? Or stores will come to me, and it makes things a lot easier. Probably local places like Chicago Comics and Quimby's here in town. I'll probably definitely give them some.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not surprised that the success that you have. The book looks great. Like
Thank you.
It's so striking. Like every image, it's really, you can really see like how much TLC you put into each page.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. And my art rep is inkyknuckles.com, and we'll be doing an art drop with the majority of the original pages. I'm holding on to a few of them.
Cool.
But the majority of the original pages from this new book are going to be available probably in about 2 weeks.
Wow. Yeah. And what about any conventions? Are you going to be doing any of that? Any traveling this year, or anything lined up for 2022? What's that like?
Yeah, I don't feel comfortable doing any this year. I am vaccinated. I know most people are getting vaccinated, but I just it's been nice actually to have a break from doing conventions, because that's a little bit of a grind. But next year, I'm definitely doing Heroes Con in Charlotte, North Carolina. It's going to be their anniversary, I think 30th anniversary, 30th or 40th. And that's always a great show. I may even just go and walk around and not even table, just because it's fun to just be there for that show. And Cake is the local indie show, and I was supposed to be a special guest last year, and of course that didn't happen. So this year I definitely want to do that show. And I think I got invited to one in Kentucky in March. That may be the first one that I do next year.
Cool.
I think it was Kentucky. Maybe I'm wrong. I'll have to look that up.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for making the time. It was really nice talking with you. I'm glad we linked up.
Yeah, you too, Adam. I really appreciate it. This has been really fun.